When one speaks about a classic, they must be modest and fabulous. So today I'm going to be talking about 2024 and the classics that I want to read in 2024. I read 48 classics last year, so I'm not afraid of 24. Is it going to be the 24? Probably not, because last year I made a list of 23 classics and I think I read 3 or 4 of them off that list. But this year I definitely tried to be a little less aspirational and a little bit more grounded. I was like, what are on my shelves? What are things that I'm like keenly interested in? I tried to take off some of them that I get overwhelmed by. I feel like some of these are on my list over and over and over again, and I get so much in my head about them that I can't read them. The first book that I'm going to talk about is a book that I've already read. This is Phineas Finn. This was my second book of the year, and it is the second book in the Can You Forgive Her / Palliser series. I had read 8 of Trollope's books before, and this was my 9th, and I really, really loved it. I loved the way that it played with politics and talked about a coming of age. Was it my absolute favorite of Trollope's novels? No, but I'm really excited to continue on. This is The Eustace Diamonds by Anthony Trollope, and I included 2 because this is a series of 6 novels. All 6 of them I plan to read this year, and I figured I can at least knock out 2 of them on this list. This is the beginning of the first chapter. It was admitted by all her friends and also by her enemies, who were in truth the more numerous and active body of the 2, that Lizzie Greystock had done very well with herself. We will tell the story of Lizzie Greystock from the beginning, but we will not dwell over it at great length, as we might have done if we loved her. I love how personal and how snarky and how funny and how social critiquey that Anthony Trollope is an author, and I think that he is going to be one of my favorite authors. This is going to be my 10th book. I've already started it, and I am really eager to find the audiobook, but I am definitely starting it right away. I'm starting to feel slightly silly about this, but I have now committed to the bit and I must keep it on. So here we go. It's Hedda Gabler, and this is a play by Henrik Ibsen. Ibsen is an incredibly brilliant Norwegian playwright that I love his work, The Dollhouse. I thought it was wonderful. He is a little bit of an early feminist, and it's really interesting to see the ways in which he looks at women's characters and the way in which society treats them and the restrictions of them. And this is a play that is also going to be performed at Stratford this year, which is the local festival. To me, that is just like this wonderful collection of 13 plays which have interconnected actors that play different roles in different things, and it is also a world-class theater. Like, it is incredibly good, and they have wonderful student rates for anyone under 30, and I am in love with going to like 4 or 5 or 6 each year. If I could go to every single one of them, I would be overjoyed, and I am definitely going to pick this up because he is one of my favorite playwrights, and I would love to read this and then also experience it live. The next book I'm going to talk about is also a novel in translation, and it is the posthumous Memoirs of Cubas. And this is translated from the Portuguese. He's a Brazilian author, and I have really, really loved his short stories that I've read before, and this is a book that is very, very well loved, and it is very funny. He is telling his history from the grave. He is, again, a very funny and satirical writer who is not afraid to make fun of himself, and I love a personal narrator who, you know, goes through all of this. I know from his previous works that his work can both be tender and also really emotional and funny, and I'm just so excited to finally read this. This has been on my TBR for a while. Talking about books that have been on my TBR for a while, Great Expectations I started when I was 15 or 16 years old, and have I read it yet? No. Have I read other Charles Dickens books? Yes. And I am starting to really like Charles Dickens after having a little bit of a rough start with him. I think I've read 4 or 5 of his novels now, and yeah, I am excited to read this. I am also considering maybe reading Bleak House. I don't know. Katie from Books and Things is doing a whole series where she's reading through Dickens, and every time I watch her wrap up a book or talk about what is important in it, I keep on wanting to read that book. So I know Bleak House is often considered one of his most brilliant in the way that it talks about things. Despite the fact that Great Expectations is one of the most like well-known books in English literature, I actually can't give you that great of a synopsis. I know that Pip is a poor guy. He is living with his older sister and her husband, and he gets told that he has great expectations. I know that there's this woman who is stuck in the past. I really, really love is Agatha Christie. I read several of her books, and I really hope that 2024 is another one of those years where I read a bunch of her books because I think she's really, really brilliant. I especially like her Miss Marple series, but Man in Brown Suit is turning 100 this year, and I would really like to read that. And there's a few others that I think I need to read, like things to not spoil them, but I would like to read those books as well. I'm looking at my list and realizing how many translated books that I have in classics, but I'm really excited because I love translated classics. And this one is Childhood, Youth, and Adulthood. And this is also called in full the Copenhagen Trilogy. And this was published in the 1950s, and it is a nonfiction account of this woman's life and her growing up experiences. And I've heard really, really brilliant things. They're also quite short, and I have the audiobook of them all together, and I would really love to read more translated fiction and more translated nonfiction. Another author that I've read a fair bit from and I've neglected as of late is Thomas Hardy. I have Choose This Year from my shelf, but as I have started that book and not finished it because I got distracted by other Victober things, I think 2 years ago, 2021, I want to start a different place, and this is The Return of the Native or The Woodlanders. These are books that were on my 2023 shelf as well, so who knows, who knows. But The Return of the Native seems incredibly interesting because it's about this guy who returns after a time away at school and stuff, and he's trying to figure out where he fits in. And I think that Hardy is a really interesting novelist that talks about the ways in which people fit in society. And then we come to Miss Margaret Atwood and all of my various options. I own a fair bit of Margaret's work. So I have The Edible Woman, and this is a book that I carried around a lot and has gotten destroyed a little bit. I'm about the halfway mark. I have really enjoyed the first part. I thought it was breathtaking and interesting, and it definitely kind of fit into the unsound woman trope, and I was really enjoying it. And then there's a narrative change halfway through that has really stumped me because I didn't like it very much. This is her debut book. And then I have the book that I've had for the longest, which is Dancing Girls. This is a collection of short stories, and I love that these two match, which I think is brilliant. And then I obviously have her most famous book, The Handmaid's Tale, and I also own the Testaments. I just own a lot of her work, and I have read 3 of her books previously that I don't own because, again, I read from the library and sometimes I make bizarre choices. I definitely want to get some headway on Margaret Atwood this year. I was really excited for this novel because I loved Octavia Butler, and then I looked up the description and it takes place in 2024, so that is perfect. I had literally already on this list and I was like, I know that it's apocalyptic and it's like about all these things, so I should probably look at a synopsis in case I'm missing anything. And then it said in 2024 Los Angeles, and I was like, what? So yeah, I think the idea is that there's global climate change and everything is destroyed, and this woman is trying to tell people about things and she's not really being believed. And I really, really appreciated Kindred by her. It is a book that is really interesting and deals with a lot of hard things, and I think this book will also be. And this book came out in 1993, but it has been considered a classic my entire life, and I think that that shows the enduring legacy of Butler's work. One of the projects that I've been working on for a really long time is called 100 Years in Books, and I'm trying to read a book that comes out every single year in the 20th century. And the 19th century, I've already started that one. One of the problems that I ran in the most is that it is hard to find books that come out between 1900 and 1907. I don't know, there was like a blank era. They were like, the Victorians have ended, we don't like Edwardians, so we're not going to publish them. But this book is really interesting. It's called Four Feathers. It is about this man who does not want to go with his regiment when they are deployed to Sedan, and instead stays back and is rendered a coward and given a coward's feather. And it's the exploration of his life, and it feels like it fits very well with shell shock and a lot of the conversations about World War I that it feels like we haven't been having before World War I, but obviously according to this book we have. And I'm really excited. I had no idea. It just happened upon one of my library apps and I was like, wait, I need to research this. And also, if you're a Downton Abbey fan and you know when the iconic Tom Branson gets given a white feather and he goes, thank you. I just love Tom Branson with my entire heart, and him just being called a coward and being like, yep, I'm okay with the fact that I'm not fighting this war. It is just an iconic reaction and I love it. The next one is an author I have a few options for, and this is E.M. Forster. I read a book by him for the first time last year, and that was A Room with a View, but I've had this on my shelf since 2020 and I've been excited to read this. It is A Passage to India, and we all know that it's going to deal with some colonial crap, and we're not a huge fan of this, and it is a novel that turns 100 this year. And he lived a long time, like he lived into the 50s or 60s or something like that, but he didn't publish a novel for the last large part of his life. It is a very small English enclave in the middle of India, and they don't have a lot of community, they don't have a lot of people that, you know, are like-minded to them, and they decide to go into India and explore the real thing, which just feels like it's going to be ripe with not fun stuff. I know that A Room with a View does not always treat Italians very well, and I cannot imagine that people of a different religion are going to be treated any better than that, but I am interested in his work and I am willing to critique it as well as enjoy it. And in the summer of 2018, I made a video that was called 10 Embarrassing Classics I Have Not Read Yet. And on that list was The Handmaid's Tale, which I will hopefully read this year. And also it was Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And the other 8 I have now read, but these 2 I have not. And I think that this book is a longer book than I thought it was, but I'm really interested. It's a 1952 novel that looks about race in America. And it is about this man who travels from the South to Harlem and in between, and it is about the ways in which Black men are invisible. It is like they do not exist. Death comes for the Archbishop, and this is by Willa Cather. When I first read My Antonia and O Pioneers, I made an entire video talking about how sometimes we love what we think we're going to abhor. I thought that I wouldn't like her, but I actually liked her a lot. I also read the book One of Ours, which is a book that looks at the First World War and the aftermath of that, and I thought it was a really interesting novel as well. I also read A Lost Lady this year, which turned 100 last year, and yeah, it was a book that I did not super love. It was like The Great Gatsby because it was all symbolic about the American dream, but it sucked. But moving on to The Archbishop, this is apparently one of her best known novels, even though I'd never really heard about it that much. But apparently it is about this one man's journey. He goes to this wilderness because she loves westerns, and he lives an entire life mostly in solitude, and hopefully it's a good book. I feel like with classic authors, I'm just often committed to them, even if I don't get anything in return. I'm like, this is not a great relationship, but I want to know, you know? So tell me about your author in which you have the most contemptuous relationship with. You're like, I should not be liking you, but I keep on coming back for more. The next book I'm going to talk about is Tempest-Tost, and this is a Canadian book that is set in Ontario that is absurd. Again, I found it through the library and I was like, what is this book? And I looked it up and it is very interesting, and it deals with like Shakespeare and plays, and it is supposed to be really funny. There's an entire trilogy. I just want to read some good old Canadian classics, and that might lead me to weird places, but I will endure through those weird places. The next book I'm going to talk about is A Man of Property by John Galsworthy. This is the first book in the Forsyth saga, which includes a lot of books spanning decades, and this begins in the early 1900s. And this has just been a thing for me for a really long time. Again, it was one of the early classics that appeared on my library way back in like 2018, and I was like, I shall read this book. And ever since then, I've been like, I shall read this book. I have never heard another living soul talk about this book, but I am determined I'm going to read it. And I realized that even though my library has the collection of the first 3 books, which is like 41 hours, I think the first book is only like 9 hours, but I do kind of really want to conquer the series just because I feel like I should conquer the series. I am realizing more and more that I have a parasocial relationship with classic books in a really like weird and strange way. But yeah, I also find it really interesting to look at a crumbling family that is, you know, a man of property that might not have wealth, and all of those interesting aspects throughout the 20th century. And I think this is a person who comes from an upper class background who is writing about this and kind of taking a lot of autobiographical details as well from his family. Going from a series of books in which I have a parasocial relationship, I'm going to go from one that I have a real relationship with. This is The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. It begins, April is the cruelest month, bleeding lilacs out of dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. It sounds beautiful. I really wanted to read it physically, but one of the main reasons why I wanted this is the first one is a narrative poem about Alfred Prufrock. And my friend Ruth, who I have an interview with, she is a published author of poetry. She is really interested in this guy and wants to write more about him. So I told her more than a year ago that I would read this book so we could discuss it. I now have the physical copy. My sister-in-law gave it to me for Christmas, so I am going to annotate this and make thoughts about, and then we're gonna have fun. There will also be other classic poems that I read, but I feel like poetry is so mood central that it's hard to put them on a TBR. Not that the rest of my reading is not mood centric. We all know that I dart around like the wind to various places. The next book I'm going to talk about is Franz Kafka and the Trial. I'm not exactly sure what this book is, but I feel like it's slightly cerebral. I'm moving my hands a lot. Can you tell that I'm filming after midnight? Because I hope that it is apparent to you. And this is a book that I think is one of his like father-fearing things. I know he had an interesting relationship with his father and ended up in weird, dark places. And I read Metamorphosis last year, and it was one of my favorite books of 2023, and I really love talking about it. So I'm really excited to read this book as well and get deeper into the Kafka-esque-ness of it all. My next lovely contestant is Daphne du Maurier. This is a terrible book to hold up considering the fact that it does not have anything. But if you read here, it will say Jamaica Inn. She is the novelist who is the author of one of my favorite books, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. You always have to say the full name because it sounds very sophisticated. I have also read My Cousin Rachel by her, and I've been hoping to read more, and I bought 3 of her books for around Christmas time for myself in a thrift store, so I definitely need to get going. I think I own 5 of her books unread now. And yeah, this is Jamaica Inn. I actually don't know the synopsis at all, so I don't know why I'm holding up this book. But I know that it is one of her most famous other than House and Strand, which I also own. And I also own Hungry Henry, which I'd never heard about, and The Frenchman's Greek. So I might read one of those, but Jamaica Inn is a book that I would like to read, and I don't display the book often because it is ugly, and I bought it at a thrift store. I was looking at it, and it's not terrible printing to actually read. I have a note in here written to myself when I bought the book saying that it was one of the books that was on my TBR the longest. That was from September of 2021, so Yeah, I should read this book. Our next book may or may not be a success story because I have begun it, and it is Shirley by Charlotte Bronte. I've considered putting on Tentative Wildfell Hill or Agnes Grey, books that I've been meaning to read for centuries because I read a Wuthering Heights and I read a Jane Eyre, so I wanted to, knock out a third Bronte sisters. I picked up Shirley because I feel like this is a book that I've hyped the least, and I think that might make it easier for me to pick up. And I have started, I got 30% in. I have not met Shirley yet. We have Carolyn, who is much more of the protagonist of the story, despite Shirley's name. But Shirley is a rich woman who is an heiress and etc. And Carolyn is not. She was abandoned by her mother and beaten by her father, and then he died of drunkenness. And now she's raised by her uncle, who is not the most emotionally there, if you know what I mean. And she is currently in love with her much older cousin, and also similarly abused / tortured kind of by French by her cousin Hortense. It's a very strange book. When I was reading it, because I had just read Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell, I was like, hey, Elizabeth Gaskell wrote Charlotte Bronte's biography. Did they inspire this? But this came out in 1949 and they did not meet until 1950. And I was really sad that that could not be a collection because this is about unions and mills and it feels very Gaskell-like and very unlike the very rural manor housey kind of vibe of the other Brontes that I know. So that was very interesting. I also want to read the beginning because I am sometimes a little down on Charlotte because she purposely suppressed Anne's books by making them, not okay. So she made sure The Tenant did not get more releases, even though it's a really cool book that talks about really important things and is very feminist. She was like, no. And because, Anne died, Anne didn't have a say. So she's like, yeah, I don't think her books are decent, so I'm not going to really promote them. So Anne Bronte is less popular as an author, which sucks. But also, she writes a lot. I think that Emily Bronte is a little more guilty of this, but Anne, there's some word choice that is just a little bit too much. Just read the beginning of Rochester being introduced and you're like, what are you even saying, dude? Why do you have to use so many words? But it also makes it very humorous. But this book, I think, begins very humorously, so we love that. Of late years, an abundant shower of curates has fallen upon the north of England. They lie very thick on the hills. Every parish has one or more of them. They are young enough to be very active, and they ought to be doing a great deal of good. But not of late years are we about to speak. We are going back to the beginning of this century. Late years, present years are dusty, sunburnt, hot, arid. We will evade the noon, forget a siesta, pass the midday in slumber, and dream of dawn. If you think from this prelude that anything like a romance is preparing for you, reader, you were never more mistaken. Do you anticipate sentiment and poetry and reverie? Do you expect passion and stimulus and melodrama? Calm your expectations. Reduce them to a lowly standard. Something real, cool, and solid lies before you. Something unromantic as Monday morning, when all who work wake with a consciousness they must rise, must betake themselves. See, Charlotte? See what I'm saying about your weird writing? That it's hard to read out loud. I'm trying to give you humor. I'm trying to showcase your humor, and yet you're letting me down. It is positively affirmed that you shall not have a taste of the exciting, perhaps toward the middle and the close of the meal, but it is resolved that the first dish set upon the table shall be one of Catholic, aye, even Anglo-Catholic, might eat on a Good Friday in Passion Week. It shall be cold lentils and vinegars without oil. It shall be unleavened bread with bitter herbs and no roast lamb. That's even better. I read it on audio, so I just knew that it was funny. I can say that this reads like unleavened bread. It is so boring. And also concerning in some places, and also so much French. Like, if you read Jane Eyre and you're like, wow, does Adele need to say as much French as she does? Hortense says 100 times more French. And I'm listening to it instead of reading it, so I don't even get the understanding of being able to, like, look at it and understand it. No idea. No idea what the heck she's saying. I have considered DNFing it because I'm 30% in and I'm like, this is weird, strange, I don't like it. There's some weird dynamics going on. But she's funny. She's funny. In 2023, we had a year of Gaskell. I read North and South, and I read parts of her Gothic short stories like The Nurse's Tale, and then I also read Mary Barton. And this year I want to read Wives and Daughters, which was an uncompleted work that she read at the end, and I've heard that it is brilliant. It deals with mother and daughter's relationships, and it's apparently like a masterpiece, and I am so excited to read this. I also want to finish her Gothic tales. I have dreams of reading several of her novellas and stuff like that. I just want to have a Gaskell life, If I get a good audio of her biography of Charlotte Bronte, I feel like that would also be cool. maybe it shall be Gaskell-esque. We have a beautiful, wonderful 1905 old money New York Edith Wharton. If you've read Age of Innocence, you know that she writes about New York and upper class people failing from underclass things just interestingly and wonderfully. This is a book from 1905 and it deals with this woman who is approaching 30 and she wants to live a married life without the responsibility. She has been flirtatious and wonderful and charming and she has countered many men, but now she's running out of funds and she has to marry. It's going to be wonderful. This year I also want to read The Secret Garden by Bronte. I got this as a present from Kara from the Wild Book Garden, who this is one of her favorite books, and I've been really excited to read this for a long time. I grew up with an adaptation of one of her other books, A Little Princess, from the 1990s, if you know that movie. Just so precious. And then I read the book with Kara and neither of us liked it, so I think that my bad taste of that can be removed and we can just enjoy this book. This is about a girl who is in an upper class mansion by herself and she, I think, finds a low-class boy. I don't know. There's another guy in there, but she also goes and explores the garden and it's beautiful and wonderful. I don't know if it's magical or just like there's a beauty in the secret garden, and I know that she deals with class stuff and like becomes less prejudiced. I'm just really interested in reading this book. It is a children's novel and I love children's novels and I love classics. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Lucy Maud Montgomery. She is my favorite novelist of all time. I really enjoy her books. Anne of Green Gables means so much to me. I've never read Emily of New Moon, but I heard this is one of her most famous series, and it follows this girl who's orphaned and she lives in a house with her aunts, and things ensue. I don't know exactly, but I'm really excited to read this book. I'm always a little challenged because I love her books so much and I want to preserve the mystery and the love, and you know, when I'm having a hard time I want to be able to read them and experience them for the first time, but then I also think I put them off because I'm so excited and I love her books. I have read 10 of her novels, but I need to read more of them, you know? And yeah, I'm really hoping that I read Emily of New Moon. If I get a little chickened out by this and how famous it is, I have Jane of Lantern Hill as well as several of her other books on my shelves that I would love to pick up. I know that I said that was the end, but really I was talking about the 24. These are my 2024 big books list. The books that I hope to read in 2024 that are huge, that are big, because I don't want to be afraid of them and I want them off my shelf and I want to experience them. And yeah, so the first one is Phineas Finn. I've already talked about this. That one is 752 pages. Then we have Bleak House, which is 1,071 pages. Very big. And then we have The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. This book is the shortest of it. It is 581 pages, but it's still pretty substantial. War and Peace. This one I did not list on it because am I going to get to it? I don't know. I think it's a 61-hour audiobook or something like this. I have been obsessed with reading War and Peace from the time I was probably like 12 years old. One of my favorite musicals of all time is The Wonderful Great Comet, Pierre and Natasha and the Great Comet of 1812. It is wonderful. It takes place like 90 pages of that novel, and that has made me want to read it even more. And I became obsessed with that musical in 2017. So the fact that it has been so many years and I have not read this book yet, I just really need to power through it. I know that I will love it, God willing, and I just really want that. And then we also have The Portrait of a Lady. This is another book I did not have in 2024 because I've had it on a long times. I have a relationship with Henry James. I really like the books that I read by him, but I read short books by him, and I would like to tackle one of his longer books. And The Portrait of a Lady is 797 pages. And then I also put Shirley on this. I originally had another Bronte, but I'll stick to one Bronte so far. And this is 624 pages. And what would make me really happy is if I read Les Misérables by Victor Hugo, because this is 1,463 pages. Les Misérables is one of my favorite musicals. I've been obsessed with it for a really long time. I now own 4 copies of Les Misérables, partly because I love it, but mostly because other people keep on giving me the book. I have never bought a copy of Les Misérables, and yet people are like, you of course love this, have a copy. So yes, it is definitely my most owned book, as well as the book I have not read, and should I fix that? Should I read 1,400 pages? I want to. I am also afraid. So this ends the story extravaganza of 2024 Classics Edition. Did I mean this video to be this long? I did not. But I would love to know what classics you want to read. Classics that you are obsessed with but you just can't read somehow. Classics that you have read that you loved that you would think I should add to this list. I feel like you probably got a pretty good taste of my various classics loves in here. Salut, goodbye, adieu, all of the other fancy things. I shall take off the silly hat and go to bed as I should have long ago. Goodbye.